Hi, welcome back to the Autistic Voice Project. As always, voice stands for validating our identity, culture, and experience. I'm Matt Lowry, LPP, an autistic therapist, evaluator, and dad in Kentucky.
I am Dr. Erin Findlay, PsyD, an autistic and ADHD and gifted, a psychologist in Napa, California, mom to dogs and a cat.
And we have a special guest that I hope will be recurring, our good friend Kade. Who are you, Kade? Tell us about yourself
Tell us
for
all
the
about
listeners.
you, Kade.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kade Sharp, friend of Matt and Erin.
That's right.
I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker over in Richland, Washington, so southeastern Washington. I'm autistic, and I'm a pet parent to 2 senior cats.
Nice.
We talked a lot last episode about how we need animals to self-regulate and co-regulate because
That's right.
we get along well with the animals. And this is the way.
That's right.
Kade joined me on my old podcast for an episode about kink after we had some encounter. I had some encounters with some neurotypicals who said, "Oh yes, the autistics can't have the sex," and I was like, "No, that's our biggest recruitment drive. That's how we make new ones."
That's right.
My son has no say in the matter. He's in there playing video games and listening to Weird Al Yankovic, as is the way. And we are going to be talking today about, for the last 2 episodes, we've talked a lot about the DSM criteria. We've talked about my rewrite of the DSM criteria. We've talked about identity versus diagnosis. But there's a lot more to identity than we talk about with, sensory profiles or the way we relate to people. Well, I mean, the way we relate to people. And one of these big things is that we differ from neurotypicals in that the neurotypicals are pretty binary in many ways. They say, "Oh yes, I have the sex. I have the 2 sexes," because they confuse sex with gender, and that's about it for them. They are very cut and dry. And you say, well, the people in India, I can't remember, have like 13 different genders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, there's an indigenous tribe, at least. I want to say somewhere in the Philippines or like Southeast Asia, where there were like 17 different genders. I don't remember.
Yeah. It's not as cut and dry as someone like RFK would have you believe. But we figured since Kade is a specialist in this area, we might have him come in and tell us about these sort of things and talk about how the autistic people might differ from this. So we'll have a discussion about all these overlapping things that. Because again, we were talking about how Pedro Pascal has a trans sister, and he is very, very outspoken about justice sensitivity, not being a bully, firing Cara Dune into the suns because, again, she went out of her way to be a jerk instead of just accepting the role of a lifetime, having a show on Disney Plus that they subsequently had to roll into Mandalorian Season 3, thus throwing off the pace, thus making me very angry with her, because that's the least of the problems. But this is the thing. It's a common thing for us autistic people. So, Kade, what do you think about all this?
I think you're spot on, and love Pedro, love his Protect the Dolls gear that he tends to wear and how he speaks out against injustice. Absolutely.
This is the way.
Statistically. Yeah, statistically, also, you are correct. Trans folks are about 6 to 9 times more likely to be autistic when compared to cisgender folks. So
what's up with that? Why do trans people say, you know what, I want to learn about trains? What is that? Tell us about this.
I might theorize that it's more that autistic folks go, hold on, how are we categorizing humans into 2 boxes? You know?
That's a good take. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at gender, and you're right, in certain tribes and cultures, there are many, many genders that they talk about and that they know exist. Same, religions as well. In American culture and a lot of European-based culture, there's just kind of there's the 2. You're a man or a woman. Some places will be a little more accommodating, especially if they go by sex, like what you'd mentioned earlier. They might say intersex people exist, but the medical model forces those people and their parents to pick a box for them.
So we were talking earlier about the bottom-up processing and how autistic people tend to be more data-driven and data-focused than allistic people, especially neurotypical people, because we see the world. I believe several episodes ago we talked about the difference between a high-definition picture and a low-definition picture, and that we essentially have more pixels in our world than the neurotypicals do. So tell us how this might link into that, because you use the phrase might recognize intersex people. So do they say, yes, man, woman, tree? What is up with this? Why don't they get it? Why do we get it better than how they don't get it? What up with them, though?
Yeah, I don't have that lived experience on the intersex side, but what I hear from my friends and many folks that are intersex is that their parents essentially get told at their birth and as they start to develop, hey, your kid's going to have a very hard life, or their body may not function in typical ways, so you've got to make a choice. So those parents freak out. No parent wants to see their kid have a tough life. And instead of us as a society going, it's just another way of existing, and we'll just help this kid learn uniquely how their body works, what their life will be like, let them figure it out for themselves and support them in that. They say, let's just make a choice so that it'll be easier. And they really just kind of box them in.
It will be easier.
Yeah.
What is up with this? Yeah, that's the thing. Because we were talking about the diagnostic criteria, about how we vex the neurotypicals. And that's how we get diagnosed, because it's based on how much they don't want to hear us talk about trains or Transformers or Pedro Pascal being awesome. So what is up with this? Who is easy? Why is it easy? Tell us about this, because, and again, it's more common than a lot of people want to recognize. I have, dare I say more than once, met somebody with, is it Klinefelter syndrome?
Yeah.
XY or XX genes, but tell us all about that. Tell us how this links into all this.
Yeah, I'm not as well versed on the biological side of it, although I have heard from many biologists that it is rare that there's only 2 of anything in any species, especially when you look at plants. There are hundreds of different sexes of plants, but absolutely, chromosomal differences, things like PCOS is even considered a difference of sex. So there are a lot of people in this world, autistic folks who are born with, I don't know how graphic we can get on your platforms, but certain genitals. If their urethra is routed in a different way, that even counts as being intersex. And a lot of people don't know that. So
that's interesting.
There's a lot of medical professionals and the community at large trying to kind of funnel people into certain boxes as far as like sex goes, and same with gender. I think in many places in society, especially American society, when you say you're trans, there might be more people now who are like, cool, so are you a trans man, a trans woman? And they stop there. So again, okay, now we only still have 2 options. There are
you
so
get 2
many
transes, and that's all the transes that you get.
Yes, and if you're not one of those 2 transes, you are a bad trans. And how could we support you? Yeah,
indeed. Yeah, and this is a thing that's come up recently, because one of the big things about the prior podcast is that I want to do more advocacy episodes, especially with this, because in Kentucky, there was a state senate got into a big thing because some dude got up and started saying something akin to, the transes is teaching the autistics to be the trans, because the autistics doesn't understand the sexes, and they're teaching us to be the transes because they don't understand how the sexes work. And meanwhile, we're all collectively face-palming and saying, oh my God, that's so ignorant. So what up with all this? How does this all link together? Because again, bottom-up processing, all of the complexities. Because again, are you saying that Noah's Ark is full of shit? Well, literally, yes, it would have to be because of all those animals. But that's what we call a pun.
Just dying over here. Carry on.
But I mean, yeah, essentially, it is so hard to box anything into 1 or 2 categories, and easy for other people to understand and make a snap judgment, easier for other people to categorize you and decide how they'll treat you based on that. So when
Ooh.
you do things that are outside of those categories, they don't know what to do. And that's uncomfortable. And we don't want to be uncomfortable. So we would rather make the autistic folks or the trans folks or the trans autistic folks be the ones who are uncomfortable and have to figure out how to navigate it. You know, it's tough.
Yeah, it's the same as the eye contact, and that's why there's so much trauma involved with all of this. Because, they say, oh, I have a preconceived notion of how you should act and how you should be. You should be this thing that I want you to be, and therefore, if you're not, you're bad. Why? What up?
Yeah.
Erin, you work with humans. What up with the humans there?
Humans like to reduce things to the lowest common denominator. We do, generally speaking, as humans, categorize things, and the thing about privilege is that the privilege of not, like, when you're in a dominant group, or if you're in a group in power, you have the ability to not have to pay attention to people who are different in some other kind of a way. You have the ability to disregard their experiences, and that translates into people actually disbelieving that those experiences exist, right?
Yeah.
And so if my worldview and or social training is such that there are only two sexes and sex and gender are the same thing, right? And I'm living as a member of a privileged class, and when I say privileged, I want to be 100% clear here. Being privileged does not mean that you don't ever have issues, and doesn't mean that you don't ever have a hard life, right? Because there are people who absolutely have privilege, who also struggle. So that's where we get into, like, intersections and things like that, where, like, maybe they might have privilege in one area and lack of privilege in another area. Like, they might have gender privilege around being a man, and skin color privilege if they're light skinned, right?
I'm a white cisgender heterosexual male in my 40s, which means that I can do all kinds of weird stuff, but not all of the weird stuff, because people still look at me funny.
Exactly. And so you could be a white cisgender, I'm not talking about you now specifically, Matt, but like
I can be, and I often am.
Right. But another white 40-year-old cisgender man who is heterosexual might also be of a lower socioeconomic status, and in that way, that man is not privileged, right? Because he doesn't have access to as much wealth, right? And so it's not, I could go into more detail, but the point is,
autistic people love detail.
I know, but I'm also, I know we're trying to keep our episodes to half an hour. So probably for a future episode, we'll go into more detail. But the point of it, thinking about intersections, is that nobody is one thing, right? And so when we're thinking about what a person's intersections are, we're acknowledging the places where they have privilege, where they have the power, because it's granted socially to not have to think about a thing, and the places where they are disempowered, socially speaking. And so when it comes to thinking about sex or gender, the person who comes in a body that feels right to them, so their sex matches their self-conception and their gender matches their self-conception, they don't have the same sense as someone, or the same lived experience as someone whose maybe their sex is not the same as how they feel like their sex should be, or their gender expression is not the way that society defines it.
And that's a very interesting thing about this, because how do you choose? Like, if you wake up, do you decide to be a woman or do you decide to be autistic? How do you make that choice?
Some people are autigender, which is it is the combination of gender and autistic, because their felt sense of their gender is intertwined with their sense of being autistic.
There is this person that I found during the pandemic. Man, I can't remember her name to save my life, but she was on social media, popped up in my reels, and I was like, that is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life. That is, I will follow her. God, I can't remember her name to save my life. Anyway,
I think I know who you're talking about, but we might not want to say her name out loud.
yeah,
Just for privacy.
but anyway, long story short, about a year ago, this person who is, again, very, very beautiful, feminine presenting, came out as trans and said, no, I am he, and I would like to be referred to as he, and has started the hormones and everything. And this is a real life, this is me seeing where I'm at on the Kinsey scale, because I will see exactly where. It's like, oh yes, as a heterosexual guy, and seeing, yes, very, very attractive, and then, well, wait, am I still attracted to someone who is more male presenting? This is going to be fascinating, because Alfred Kinsey, totally autistic. We'll come back to that in a future episode. But anyway, watching somebody who, from the outside, you say, man, that person has a physical appearance that most other people would desire, but yet they don't like that. What up with that? Why don't they like that thing that other people should like? Where does this, as they say, dysphoria come in, and what is up with this dysphoria? Why is there a meat-body mismatch? Where does this come from?
Yeah, that's a solid question. Before we jump into that, just so you know, Matt, and so our listeners know, if someone does later on say they use a different pronoun, even if you refer to a past memory, you can still use that new pronoun.
Oh, yes.
Just so you know about that person.
A valuable learning exercise. Yes. Because
well done.
he is a he, has always been a he, just didn't put it on social media up until recently.
He's now out as being a he.
That's awesome.
Now, yes. Now has made it public. Yes, valuable learning exercise, and good to update the Rolodex.
Yeah. And
Thanks,
then
Kate.
as far as dysphoria goes, oh my gosh, we could do way more than 30 minutes just on dysphoria.
Oh, yes.
There are a couple prominent theories out there, and then there are a few narratives that many trans people feel are kind of the correct ones. But with any human, there's going to be a difference for everybody. So
Not a monolith, you say.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating.
So one of those theories, though, about why do people have dysphoria is actually more about society's perception of them than it is about an internal sense of disconnect from their body. So it is tough to prove, because for many people that internal disconnect starts when you're younger, when you keep getting gendered differently than you feel on the inside, and you start to realize, consciously and subconsciously, that it's because of the way you look, or because of what other people say about you, or because of when they say, all right, girls over here, boys over here, we're going to do a classroom activity. You have to pick one. And if you go to the side you feel, they say, no, you're supposed to be on that side. So the pressures from others and the thoughts and the way that others treat you makes you very uncomfortable. And it builds and it grows inside, and that shame and all of it grows. So that's one theory. Another one is that truly people feel that almost phantom limbs. They have either anatomy that doesn't match who they are, or they are missing things that they feel they should also have. So it's very interesting, and there are still not enough studies out there. Similarly to just autistic research, a lot of researchers try to put it into tiny little boxes and simplify it. And I don't know that on concepts like that, it's like an existential thing. How do you simplify it into some neat little boxes and say our participants fit into these 3 categories only?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when there might not be words that currently exist to identify those experiences. Because if, again, when we talk about privilege and the dominant culture and the dominant people who label other people, there might not be current labels that exist to accurately convey these experiences.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And sometimes they need us, especially when we're working with them in a clinical sense, to help them name that experience. Like one of the memories that's coming up right now is just a very profound experience that I had working with a autistic trans client who has transitioned into a woman, and talking about that sort of phantom uterus that she has, right? And that experience brought her to tears, because she was like, oh my God, yes, I can feel it. It's there, right? I can feel the absence of it as an experience that I didn't have, but I didn't like feel its ghost, you know. And like what an amazing moment that I was able to give words to an experience she was having that she couldn't find words for, and that they resonated so deeply with her. That was so powerful, such a gift.
Yeah.
As a cishet male who is also obnoxious, I'm not allowed to feel things. So tell us about what sort of feelings people might have and how to respond to these feelings, because that sounds like I would use the word traumatic. If you're missing an essential piece of oneself, like a uterus, that sounds like that would be incredibly distressing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think that there's one size fits all as to how to handle things like that. Sometimes just being able to talk about it really takes a lot of that weight off, because when you're told your whole life, no, you can never have that, or you'll never be able to do that, or the things that anatomy would allow for, that's never going to be in your future, that just adds and adds. So to be able to talk about it or process it however they see fit, whether that's art, poetry, music, dance, like you've talked about in other episodes, there are so many ways you can let those emotions out. And then for folks who are like, I need to take steps towards aligning my body with who I am, which can look different for everyone. You know, not every trans person takes any medical steps at all. And that, you know, you can still see someone who's quite beautiful and feminine, and he can still be a man.
Very much so, yes.
But sometimes that medical piece really brings people a lot of actual peace. You know, it can really help people. Yeah, I think it's very different for everyone. There are also lots of prosthetics out there. So if someone is like, my chest doesn't look the way that I need it to look, there are options to augment or decrease how that looks that are not surgical in nature. So there are a lot of ways people can experiment with gender and sex and their body and how they want to express themselves. And I think, too, there are a lot of trans folks. And when I say trans, I kind of use the umbrella term. So genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, agender. People who are under that umbrella, they don't necessarily experience dysphoria. But when they get gendered in a way that matches who they are, they experience euphoria and go, wait a minute, maybe I'm not actually what everyone has been calling me this whole time. That felt really good.
So tell me about, I hear that humans clump together and form what we call communities.
Yes.
Tell me about being in a group of humans that help you feel that euphoria, treat you with respect, and understand you and an identity. What is that experience like, especially if somebody I saw once said that loneliness is being homesick for a place you've never been. What is up with this? Tell me about this finding other people who get you.
I think community is so powerful. You know, whether I'm working with clients or talking to friends who don't have much community yet, being around others who get it, even if they don't understand your exact feelings or experiences, can just, I mean, the word peace comes to mind again. Like, that can be peaceful. To know that you're understood on a deeper level without having to change anything about yourself, I think. And also inherently, you know, when I, around 19 or 20, was like, there's a word for who I am. Like, originally I thought, okay, this is probably a sexuality thing. In high school, I was like, maybe I'm bisexual, but I don't want to tell anyone. Around 19 or 20, I was like, oh, let me go to therapy. Let me figure this out. Therapist was like, well, do you know about Chaz Bono? Do you know about trans people? And I'm like, what is that? I do not know. And even though her advice was read Chaz's biography, horrible, sad, awful, not at all like my life, but I was like, he's alive and he's happy now for the most part, you know? So even just seeing the representation was huge. And then once I got involved with the local queer community, I mean, it feels like being home. And inherently in the queer community, because queer folks are 2 to 3 times more likely to be autistic as well, so queer and trans folks, you're also around people with similar neurotype, and communication tends to feel easier too.
And that's a big thing, because we were talking about rejection sensitivity and scopophobia, the fear of being perceived. And this is a big thing, because if you grow up with constant criticism of what you should be, what you should not be, you learn to mask and hide your true self, which takes a lot of energy. And if you learn that every time you step outside the door, you're going to be criticized or shunned or whatever, sooner or later you just stop going out, and that's incredibly depressing. But what up with these people that like you. There are people who like. That's a fascinating thing. Yeah.
Yeah, being around people who like you for you, not necessarily because of who, it's not like joining a Girl Scout troop where it's all girls and girl power, which is fantastic. But one of the joining things there is the gender of the group. Luckily, Girl Scouts is very progressive now, and that's not the only reason you join, but back then, same with Boy Scouts, it's so gendered. Or if you're at a church youth group and they separate it by gender, like part of that connection is all around gender. When you're with trans and queer people, sure, you talk about those things occasionally, but it's more about, oh, thank goodness we're in a safer space where we're less likely to get misgendered, more likely to get understood. Who here have common interests? Let's hang out. We don't just hang out because we're trans. I mean, I guess if you're in a rural enough area, that's all you have. Maybe you hang out just because you're trans or queer, but you build real deep relationships with people that you don't have to educate every step of the way about what gender means to you and your identity.
And it sounds like safety would be a big thing about that because, again, thanks to all of the things going on, it seems incredibly unsafe a lot of the time to be in any variation from what is accepted by old, white, cisgender, heterosexual lawmakers. It seems like it's a constant battle out there. So what is it to feel safe, to be able to come in and take off the armor and to say, oh, look, people... Okay, so one of the things is there's a difference between acceptance and belonging. Because acceptance means, yes, I will tolerate you within the confines of this group. Belonging is, you belong here. You fit here. We like you for you. What is up with that safety thing?
Yeah, I think it's the almost unspoken understanding. It just builds a safer foundation, and when you're around people who have similar experiences, that tends to happen quicker for sure. I mean, I even find it in autistic community, even if a majority of the people around me are cisgender, like there's just a deeper understanding of how we work, how we interact. And so similarly, that safety is huge, especially for folks who are newer to figuring out who they are, maybe don't have a super great support system already. Yeah, you've got to have somewhere you feel safe. Otherwise, it's going to lead to you masking your gender, your actual identity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah, someone who did it for a long, long time. Absolutely. Yeah. And then when we think of this intersection, you're masking your autistic traits, you're masking your gender, you might be masking your sexuality. Who are you?
Well, that's when people really, really start to lose connection with who they are. We've talked on and off about developmental trauma over the last several episodes, and this is another way that developmental trauma can absolutely impact the lives of our siblings in, whether autistic or not autistic, our trans siblings, trans in the umbrella sense, that they are also getting told who you are is wrong, what you think is wrong, the way you show up is wrong, the experiences you're reporting are wrong, or feeling bad for wrong, right? And so all of these things chip away at a person's sense of who they are inside, and that creates the developmental trauma moving forward, right? Because their literal self is being eroded, and rebuilding that sense of self is really crucial for a healthy life. And that is exhausting and painful work for someone who's made it to adulthood, who's never had the reality of their self to be validated.
This seems like that might be a very good topic for an episode, because how can you have relationships with others if you don't know who you are yourself? Would you all be willing to stick around for an episode where we talk about that? Because that sounds like that would be a good listener thing.
I think the listeners would love that.
Yeah, I think we totally should. I know we're running up on time. I want to say some of what Erin's describing is why autistic and trans folks and queer folks are more likely to struggle with substance use, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, all the scary things. Yeah. So if I know your podcast is a lot on like, how do you be a healthy autistic person? How do you have autistic health and wellness? And I would say, to kind of wrap us up, find community, even if you're just lurking.
Yes.
Like if it takes you 6 months, 12 months before you even interact locally or online with another person in the community, surround yourself.
So important.
Yeah.
So in theory, if we have listeners out there, and you indeed are my favorite listener, if you don't have a community, it's good to find one, and hopefully we can be of service in doing that, because I hear that those community things where the humans gather, they can be nice.
Mm-hmm.
But for right now, we will cut off
Can
for
be.
today, and we will pick back up whenever we have our next episode, because being all timey-wimey, I have no idea when these things will air, but they'll happen, and we'll come back with Kade, Erin, and me, and we'll talk about this identity and relationships and community and all that other neat stuff.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. Really excited to get to participate as someone who also doesn't love being perceived. I do like getting the info out there and helping others. So if listeners want to learn more about me, my private practice webpage is kadesharp.com, and then I am hopefully in the near future starting a similar podcast as far as autistic folks go with my co-host Sabrina Longley. You can find us at neurokink.org/AUYS. It'll be called Aces Up Your Sleeve, and we hope to talk autistic relationship things. Thank you both for having me.
Always a pleasure, Kate.
Have a good one.